The Cardinal, a figure of unquestionable authority and faith, begins his confession with a palpable weight in his voice. He observes his listeners with weary eyes, burdened by the dark secrets that consume him. His words are carefully chosen, as if each syllable carries the force of years of torment. He explains that what he is about to reveal will shake their deepest beliefs, forever changing the way they see the world and their faith. There is no longer room for doubt. The veil of security that once covered their souls will be torn apart. He mentions the title that was once his pride, El Cardinal. To him, it represented the embodiment of his faith, his unwavering commitment to God and the Church. But now, that title is an unbearable burden, a constant reminder of the terrible truth he holds within. His faith, once a beacon of hope, is now a prison built on lies and dark mysteries. He, who sought refuge in the sacred scriptures, discovered that what he revered had roots in something wicked and ancient. The revelation builds with growing tension. The Cardinal reveals that ever since he crossed the gates of the Vatican, as a young priest full of zeal, he witnessed secrets no one should ever see. He was chosen, assigned to protect what could never come to light. But the more he guarded, the more his soul crumbled. These secrets are not just a challenge to faith. They challenge reality itself, breaking the boundaries between the world we know and what lurks in the shadows. He speaks of sleepless nights, consumed by these secrets that pulsed within him like a curse. For decades he kept these truths, hoping the world would never have to face them. However, the weight of this silence corroded his spirit. The Cardinal stands on the brink of madness, torn between the need to confess and the fear of the consequences. What he is about to reveal is not a simple confession, but the culmination of an internal struggle between his faith and the terror he witnessed. The atmosphere surrounding the revelation is somber. The Cardinal glances around, his tired eyes assessing the faces before him. He knows that what he is about to say cannot be unsaid. His listeners will feel the weight of this truth just as he did, and their lives, like his, will never be the same. He warns them to prepare themselves, for this truth will strip away the comfort and security they have believed in all their lives. He takes a deep breath and finally, with an almost inaudible whisper, begins his confession. The Cardinal knows this secret has haunted him for years, destroying his faith and spirit. Now he must free himself from this curse, share the burden with those who are ready, or at least willing, to listen. This is his last chance at redemption before death takes him. The Cardinal's life changed drastically when he was promoted to a position many would consider a privilege. He was assigned to work in the depths of the Vatican, far from the bright sanctuaries admired by the faithful and tourists. The secret archives were a mysterious place, wrapped in silence and shadows. His mission seemed simple, to guard documents and artifacts that should never see the light of day. However, he soon realized that these archives hid far more than mere historical curiosities. The first few months were filled with pure fascination. The Cardinal, then young and fervent, felt honored to have access to relics and texts that dated back to the beginnings of the Church. But as time passed, he began to notice disturbing patterns. Ancient documents described supernatural events, forbidden rituals, and creatures that did not belong to our world. At first, he turned a blind eye, believing these were simply testimonies of God's and the devil's mysteries. But something inside him began to change. Among the artifacts he cataloged were objects that seemed to pulse with their own energy. The Cardinal found himself drawn to these items, even without understanding their meaning. There were books written in dead languages, texts that seemed to vibrate with hidden power. Testimonies from men of faith detailed unspeakable horrors, encounters with forces that defied logic. The Cardinal, once a man of unwavering faith, began to feel the weight of these revelations on his soul. As the years passed, reality began to unravel. The Cardinal realized that the secrets he guarded were not just to protect the Church, but to hide something terrible. He wondered how many others within the Vatican's upper echelons were aware of these truths. His prayers, once so fervent, were now filled with doubt. He began to question whether the Vatican was truly the bastion against evil he had always believed it to be. One night, during an especially dark evening, he felt a presence in the corridors of the archives. The shadows seemed to move differently, as if something or someone was watching him. It was as though the very artifacts he guarded were coming to life, calling to be discovered. This feeling of something terrible always lurking became a constant in his life. He began to fear the very corridors where he worked. The mental strain grew so intense that the Cardinal almost stopped leaving his quarters. The weight of the secrets suffocated him. The voices of the priests around him seemed to echo from a distant reality. He had become a shadow of the man he once was. Yet, even with his spirit corroded, something inside him compelled him to continue. He knew there was still more to uncover, something much larger than all the dark truths he had already witnessed. One day, while performing his daily cataloging tasks, the Cardinal came across a text he should never have seen. It was not listed in the official records, and its title, The Nocturnal Society, immediately caught his attention. He knew his superiors had warned about the existence of texts considered too dangerous to read, and this seemed to be one of them. But something compelled him to open it, as if the book was calling him, challenging his faith and sanity. Opening the first page, he felt a chill run down his spine. The words were unlike anything he had ever read. The text spoke of a secret order, formed within the Vatican itself, operating in the shadows since time immemorial. This society was not aligned with the teachings of Christ. On the contrary, its members performed macabre rituals and followed a leadership that, according to the manuscript, could not be human. There was something deeply evil in what he was reading. The book described the existence of a leader, a figure known as the Black Pope. This being, according to the text, had persisted throughout the centuries, always hidden in the shadows, manipulating events within the church. The Cardinal could not believe what he was reading. He had always dismissed these tales as myths, legends created to scare the superstitious. But the descriptions were so detailed, so meticulously crafted, that he began to doubt his disbelief. As he continued reading, the Cardinal delved deeper and deeper into the abyss that was this secret society. The Nocturnal Society carried out human sacrifices, mysterious disappearances, and was involved in rituals aimed at nothing less than controlling the dark forces of the world. He saw the names of clergymen he knew well, men who had mysteriously disappeared or been sent on missions from which they never returned. Everything was connected. The Cardinal knew that this knowledge was a curse. The more he read, the more he felt his faith disintegrating. He wanted to stop, to close the book, and forget what he had seen, but it was too late. Something had already changed inside him. Each word seemed to engrave itself in his mind, an indelible mark that condemned him to know more than any human should. As he reached the final pages, the name Black Pope appeared again, this time with disturbing details about his origin and destiny. When he finished reading, the Cardinal closed the book with trembling hands. His mind was in a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. He knew he could not simply ignore what he had discovered, but he also knew that speaking about it could cost him his life. The secrets the Vatican hid were not just spiritual, but something far more visceral, something that threatened the very existence of humanity. At that moment, the Cardinal understood that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The Cardinal, battling the growing terror within him, decided to report his findings to his superiors. He believed that the Church, despite its dark secrets, was still a force for good, and that those in power would want to confront the evil infiltrating their ranks. With a heavy heart, he requested an audience with his mentor, a bishop he trusted deeply. However, the bishop's reaction was anything but what he expected. As he began to recount what he had read in the forbidden text, he noticed something strange in the bishop's eyes. Instead of surprise or shock, what he saw was fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from the unknown, but the kind born from deep understanding. The bishop listened in silence, without interruption, and when the Cardinal finished, the silence that followed was even more disturbing. The bishop, with a controlled voice, simply said, "Forget what you read. Some truths are not meant to be revealed." The Cardinal was confused. How could a man of faith, someone he had always seen as an example of devotion, react this way to something so terrible? He tried to insist, explaining that what he had discovered could not be ignored. But the bishop, with chilling coldness, raised his hand and interrupted him. "You don't understand, son. There are forces we cannot control. It's better to leave things as they are." Those words echoed in his mind like a sinister warning. The cardinal left the bishop's office in a state of shock. What was happening? He had trusted the church his entire life, believing it to be a bulwark against evil. But now, it seemed that those who should have been its guardians were involved in something dark, something they preferred to keep hidden at all costs. He felt betrayed, not just by his superiors, but by the very institution to which he had dedicated his life. Still unwilling to be completely shaken, the cardinal decided to try again. This time, he approached another superior, a man known for his righteousness and justice. But the response was even worse. Before he could even finish his story, the superior interrupted him with a harsh, threatening voice. "Don't mention this again," he said. "For your sake, and for the church's, it's best you walk away from this matter." The tone left no room for doubt. He was being silenced. At that moment, the cardinal realized he was completely alone. No one was willing to help him, and worse, those who knew the truth were deeply involved. The Vatican was not just the guardian of faith, but also the guardian of dark secrets, secrets they would protect at any cost. Feeling the crushing weight of betrayal and isolation, he realized he could trust no one. If he wanted to discover the truth, he would have to do it alone. From the moment his attempts to seek help failed, the cardinal was forced to act on his own. He didn't know who to trust, and his superiors clearly wanted him to forget everything he had uncovered. But his curiosity, mixed with fear, drove him to continue. It was during his solitary investigations that he found something that would change everything: an ancient map, lost in one of the deepest and most forgotten archives of the Vatican. The map, hand-drawn on an aged parchment, showed a series of tunnels running beneath the Vatican. These tunnels were not mentioned in any official documents, and the cardinal knew that very few people would be aware of their existence. There was something disturbing about the precision of the details, as if the cartographer had walked through those dark and forgotten corridors. Whatever was hidden there, it was not meant to be found. Intrigued and terrified, the cardinal decided he had to explore these tunnels. He knew that something terrible was hidden in the depths of the Vatican, and this map might be his only chance to find answers. For days, he studied the document, trying to trace a route that would take him as far as possible without being detected. The thought of venturing alone into such a dark place terrified him, but the need to know the truth outweighed his fear. Finally, one night, the cardinal made his decision. He prepared in silence, waiting for everyone in the Vatican to be asleep. He took only a small lantern, the map, and his crucifix, knowing he was about to venture into forbidden territory. With his heart racing, he followed the path indicated on the map, descending stairs that seemed endless until the air grew colder and the silence became absolute. The tunnels were claustrophobic, with cold, dripping stone walls. Each step he took seemed to echo infinitely, as if the very bowels of the earth were watching his journey. As he advanced, the cardinal felt a growing weight in his chest, as if something was approaching, something that should not be awakened. The map led him further and further down, until he reached an ancient door, corroded by time. This was it. The cardinal knew that whatever was hidden behind that door would be the answer to all the secrets he had uncovered. With trembling hands, he pushed the door, which opened with a loud and sinister creak. The air that flowed from within was heavy and fetid, and the cardinal immediately knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He was about to confront the heart of the darkness within the Vatican. As he passed through the door, the cardinal was immediately engulfed by deep darkness, cut only by the faint light of his lantern. The corridor before him seemed to stretch endlessly, with walls covered in inscriptions in a language he could not identify. Something about that place seemed alive, as if the shadows were moving around him, whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. His footsteps echoed in a sinister rhythm, almost as if the corridors themselves were pulsing with a malignant energy. As he advanced, he began to hear distant sounds, like whispering voices and footsteps that shouldn't have been there. The terror grew with each step, but he knew he couldn't turn back. Something was compelling him to move forward, as if an invisible force was guiding him to the heart of that profane place. The air grew heavier and heavier, as if the very environment was trying to crush him, suffocating any hope he still had. After walking for what felt like an eternity, the cardinal reached a large underground chamber. What he saw there paralyzed him. In the center of the room, a group of hooded figures was gathered around a stone altar. illuminated only by the flickering light of black candles. The figures murmured in an ancient language, their chants filling the air with a sense of impending death. The cardinal hid in the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. Among those figures he recognized familiar faces, men he knew well, priests he had seen walking the halls of the Vatican. But now they were involved in something monstrous. The clothes they wore were different, dark, and their hands were stained with blood. In the center of the altar, a human body lay motionless, and the members of the Nocturnal Society approached, one by one, to drink the blood of the victim. It was a vampire ritual. The cardinal couldn't believe what he was seeing. Vampires, creatures of darkness, existed within the walls of the church itself. And worst of all, they were organized, operating for centuries in the shadows of the Vatican, hidden from the eyes of the faithful. This was the Nocturnal Society, and what they were doing there was not just a simple sacrifice. It was the prelude to something far more sinister. They were preparing the way for the return of an entity the cardinal could barely conceive. As he watched, breathless, the leader of the ritual caught his attention even more. He was an ancient man, with pale, wrinkled skin, but there was something abnormal about his presence. This man did not age like others. He was a cardinal, but his true face was that of a creature that should have died centuries ago. The cardinal knew, in that instant, that this being was directly connected to the Black Pope, the creature they were preparing to awaken. The cardinal, hidden in the shadows of the great underground chamber, watched the ritual unfold before his terrified eyes. The circle of hooded figures moved in perfect synchronicity around the stone altar, their murmurs turning into deep, disturbing chants. Each word spoken seemed to carry a dark energy that reverberated through the chamber walls, filling the air with a sense of inevitability. The cardinal knew he was witnessing something beyond what any mortal should see. At the center of the altar, the human victim remained motionless, as if in a state of trance, ready for the sacrifice. Around her, the members of the Nocturnal Society carefully prepared the elements of the ritual. Black candles were arranged in a precise manner, forming symbols the cardinal didn't recognize, but that pulsed with an almost palpable force. The blood flowing from the victim's body was collected in a silver basin, while the leader of the group recited words in a dead language, older than Christianity itself. The cardinal, fighting against the growing panic inside him, felt that time was running out. Every second that passed brought them closer to the climax of the ritual, to the release of something that should not exist in this world. He knew he was alone and defenseless, but the horror of standing by, doing nothing, gnawed at him. Even though he knew his intervention could be futile, something inside him urged him to act. However, the terrible truth was that he knew the evil being awakened could not be stopped by human means. The chants intensified, and the leader of the Nocturnal Society, the ancient vampire cardinal, approached the altar with a ritualistic dagger in hand. The object gleamed in the light of the black candles, and the metal seemed to pulse with an energy the cardinal could feel, even from a distance. The leader raised the dagger, and a deathly silence fell over the room. The cardinal held his breath, aware that he was witnessing the beginning of something apocalyptic. The sacrifice was about to be made, and the Black Pope was about to be freed. As the dagger's blade descended, cutting through the air and piercing the victim's chest, a burst of dark energy filled the room. The blood spurted and seemed to evaporate in the air, forming indistinct figures in the shadows. The cardinal felt the impact of that force on his very soul, as if he were being sucked into an abyss of horror. He tried to retreat, but his legs seemed paralyzed by fear. He knew the ritual was almost complete, and there was no turning back. Then, the leader of the Nocturnal Society raised the silver basin containing the victim's blood and began chanting the final verse of the incantation. The cardinal couldn't believe what he was seeing. The words the leader pronounced were not just an invocation. They were a command, a summons for something that had been imprisoned for centuries in the depths of the Vatican. When the final word was spoken, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging the chamber into oppressive darkness. The Black Pope was awakening. The air in the chamber became thick and unbearable, as if the very atmosphere was bending under the presence of a malignant force now dominating the space. The cardinal, trapped in a state of paralysis from pure terror, watched with wide eyes as the stone above the central altar began to crack. The sound of the stone splitting echoed like thunder in the depths, signaling what was to come. He felt time and space warping around that point, as if the universe itself was resisting the presence of the being that was about to be freed. From within the cracks in the stone, a hand emerged. It was not a human hand. Its skin was pale as death, with long fingers and claws that seemed made of pure darkness. The presence emanating from that hand was suffocating, an entity so ancient that its very existence defied any concept of life and death. The Cardinal knew at that moment that the being they had awakened was not just a vampire, but something far worse. The Black Pope was evil in its purest form, an entity whose existence corrupted everything around it. As the body of the Black Pope emerged from the crypt, the darkness in the room seemed to take shape, enveloping his figure. It was as if the very shadow was an extension of him, flowing from his presence and swallowing the remaining light. His eyes, if they could be called that, were voids of pure emptiness, reflecting only the promise of destruction and despair. The Cardinal felt his sanity wavering before this being, unable to comprehend how such a creature could exist. The members of the Nocturnal Society fell to their knees in reverence, their heads bowed in total submission to their master. They had waited centuries for this moment, and now the Black Pope, the Antichrist, stood before them, ready to claim his rightful place in the world. The Cardinal, hidden in the shadows, watched helplessly as the leader of the vampires approached the imposing figure and whispered something in an unknown language. The Black Pope moved slowly, his gestures imbued with a macabre elegance, as if every movement was a dance of death. Without any warning, the Black Pope raised a hand, and with a simple gesture, disintegrated one of the vampires kneeling closest to him. The creature's body turned to dust before everyone's eyes, without so much as a scream of pain. The display of power was enough to make the Cardinal realize the magnitude of the threat now walking free. The Black Pope didn't just control the vampires. He dominated them completely, and his hunger for destruction was palpable. With terror coursing through his veins, the Cardinal knew there was nothing more he could do. He was in the presence of something that could not be stopped, something the world was not prepared to face. The Black Pope was free, and his rise would mark the end of any order the Vatican or humanity had ever known. The only thing left for the Cardinal was to try to survive, if he was even allowed to live with the knowledge that the Antichrist walked among mortals. As the Black Pope rose in all his dark majesty, his empty eyes found the Cardinal's, as if he had known from the beginning that there was an intruder. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The Cardinal felt an overwhelming presence invade his mind, as if his soul was being laid bare before the entity. His legs trembled, and he knew, in that instant, that his life was in the hands of a creature that knew no compassion or mercy. Yet, death did not come. The Black Pope, with a deep, resonant voice, whispered words that only the Cardinal could hear. "You, who dared witness my return, will be my testimony." Those words felt like an eternal sentence. The Cardinal would not be killed, nor freed from the burden of what he had seen. Instead, he had been cursed to carry the truth with him for the rest of his existence. The Black Pope did not need to kill him. His punishment was far worse than death. He would live knowing the Antichrist had returned, and that no one would ever believe him. The Cardinal, still paralyzed by terror, could not speak, but inside he felt the crushing weight of the curse. He knew that the Black Pope had shaped his destiny with those words, condemning him to a life of isolation, disbelief, and despair. He would be the bearer of a secret so terrible that no other human could bear it. The cruel irony was that he, who had always sought to protect the truth, was now cursed to live with a truth that could not be revealed. The vampires around him continued their chants, indifferent to the internal torment the Cardinal was suffering. They were immersed in the glory of their master, while he was trapped in a private hell. The weight of the curse crushed him, and he knew he would be unable to escape this invisible prison. Every day he lived from that moment on would be torture, for he knew what was coming, but could do nothing to stop it. Slowly the chains that bound him loosened, and he was left behind, an insignificant spectator to the grandeur of the ritual that had just taken place. The vampires, obeying the Black Pope's silent commands, dispersed, ready to begin the next phase of their plan. The Cardinal, on the other hand, was free, but his freedom was a lie. He would never escape the nightmare he had witnessed. The curse the Black Pope had placed upon him was clear. He would live, but his soul was condemned. He would never again have peace, neither in life nor in death. And so, the Cardinal, once a man of faith and devotion, had now become the bearer of a secret that would consume his soul forever. The Black Pope would never need him again, for his mission was complete. The Cardinal would live to see the world crumble under the weight of the darkness he had unleashed. When the Cardinal returned to the surface of the Vatican, the first light of dawn was painting the Roman sky with shades of gold and orange. However, to him, the beauty of that sunrise was completely insignificant. He walked like a ghost through the halls of the Vatican, haunted by what he had witnessed in the depths. Every step he took seemed heavier than the last, as if the Black Pope's curse was draining his vitality. His soul was poisoned, and he knew he would never be the same. In the days that followed, the Cardinal tried in vain to warn his colleagues and superiors about what had happened. But as he feared, no one believed his words. Those who listened to him at first soon distanced themselves, thinking he had lost his sanity. The truth was simply too great to be accepted. And those who knew of the Nocturnal Society's existence, like the bishop he had approached earlier, merely advised him to remain silent. The feeling of isolation began to corrode his mind. The Vatican, once his spiritual home, was now a place of horror and betrayal. His brothers in faith distanced themselves from him, and he became a pariah, a solitary figure whose warnings were seen as the delusions of a disturbed man. Even when he tried to pray, the words died in his mouth. The faith he had carried throughout his life was dead, consumed by the knowledge of what truly resided in the Church's shadows. The Cardinal, in his darkest moments, wondered if he would ever find peace. The Black Pope's curse kept him trapped in an endless cycle of mental torment. He couldn't sleep, for his dreams were dominated by images of the tomb opening and the darkness that swallowed everything around it. In his waking hours, his mind constantly returned to the moment the seals were broken and the evil entity was freed. The Black Pope lived in his thoughts, a constant shadow that never left him. As the years passed, the Cardinal abandoned any attempt to communicate what he had witnessed. The truth was that no one would ever believe him. He was seen as a broken man, consumed by his own paranoia. The years of solitude had turned him into an almost invisible figure within the Vatican, an old man forgotten by all, wandering the halls like a shadow. But he knew he could not escape his destiny. The curse followed him, and he was trapped in an endless cycle of despair. Time passed, and the Cardinal watched the world change around him, yet none of it mattered to him. He knew that one day, the Black Pope would claim his throne and bring destruction to humanity. He, the last guardian of this terrible secret, was doomed to watch helplessly as the evil prepared to fulfill its plan. And while others went on with their lives, ignorant of the impending danger, he lived with the certainty that the end was near, and that nothing could be done to stop it. As the years went by, the Cardinal began to notice the signs of the Black Pope's final return. The shadows he had witnessed moving in the depths of the Vatican began to expand. Reports of mysterious disappearances became more frequent, and the Cardinal knew this was only the beginning. The Nocturnal Society was moving in the shadows, preparing the ground for the ascension of their leader. The Black Pope's return would no longer be something discreet. It would be apocalyptic. The Vatican, now a fortress of secrets and corruption, remained blind to the danger. Or worse yet, many within the Church were aware and complicit. The Cardinal, who had once tried to warn his brothers in faith, now merely observed, powerless, as events unfolded. He knew the Black Pope was gaining strength, fed by the darkness the Nocturnal Society cultivated in secret. But he also knew there was nothing he could do to stop what was coming. News of disturbances around the world began to align with what the Cardinal had read in the forbidden texts. Nations were on the brink of collapse, and humanity seemed more divided and weakened than ever. It was the perfect moment for a force like the Black Pope, who didn't need wars to rule, but chaos. The Cardinal knew everything was being carefully orchestrated, and the Antichrist would soon emerge from the shadows to claim his rightful place. The members of the Nocturnal Society, who had remained hidden for centuries, now began to be more bold. The Cardinal saw familiar faces involved in public events, manipulating the masses and world leaders. What he had witnessed in the tunnels beneath the Vatican was no longer a hidden threat. The Black Pope was about to reveal himself to the world, and when that happened, there would be no turning back. Humanity would face its end under the yoke of a power it could barely comprehend. With each passing day, the Cardinal felt the weight of the curse intensify. He knew he would not live to see the full ascension of the Black Pope, but he also knew that his death would bring no relief. His soul was imprisoned, and he was doomed to carry the burden of knowing what was to come, even though he could do nothing to stop it. The world was on the brink of the abyss, and he, the only one with the knowledge to warn humanity, was powerless. The darkness was spreading, and soon the Black Pope would rule over everything. The Cardinal, now in his final days, watched the Vatican from afar, knowing the end was near. He could no longer fight, nor even pray. His faith had been destroyed, as had his spirit. The Black Pope had won, and the Cardinal was doomed to witness humanity's final moments, even if no one would ever know of his struggle. He had been cursed to live with the truth, and that truth was about to reveal itself in all its dark glory. Now, lying on his deathbed, the Cardinal feels the weight of his years of torment coming to an end. His body is weak, barely able to support its own weight. His hands, once steady with the power of faith, now tremble from exhaustion. Yet his spirit, though shattered, still carries the burden the Black Pope placed upon him. He knows that even when his body fails, his soul will be marked forever. Death, for him, will not be a release, but the beginning of a new kind of torment. As he gazes at the ceiling of the convent where he spends his final days, the Cardinal reflects on how he arrived at this point. He remembers how he was in the beginning, full of faith and hope, believing that the Vatican was the last line of defense against evil. Now, he knows the truth. Evil wasn't waiting outside, ready to attack. It had always been inside, growing like a disease, infiltrating every aspect of the Church. The faith he had nurtured was merely a tool in the hands of those who served the Black Pope. Each day since that night in the tunnels had been constant torture. The Cardinal had seen the world change, nations rise and fall, but he knew none of it mattered. The true threat had been lurking in the shadows, and soon it would reveal itself. The vampires of the Nocturnal Society had waited patiently for the right moment, and the Black Pope had only been gathering power, waiting for the moment when humanity was sufficiently weakened so that he could rise as its absolute ruler. The Cardinal knew there wasn't much time left. The world he had known was about to be swallowed by darkness. He no longer felt fear, but a deep resignation. He had fought, tried to warn others, tried to resist the evil power, but in the end, he had been destined to fail. The Black Pope was a force that could not be stopped by mortal hands, and his ascension was inevitable. The Cardinal had been just a pawn in a much larger game, a spectator in the rebirth of the Antichrist. As the Cardinal took his final breaths, he felt his soul being pulled to another place, a place of eternal darkness, where he would continue to carry the burden of his knowledge. He knew his death would change nothing. The world was doomed, and the Black Pope would rule over the ashes of civilization. The curse the Black Pope had placed upon him would never be broken. Even after death, he would be a silent witness to the apocalypse that was to come. With his last strength, the Cardinal whispered one final prayer, not for salvation, but for an end. He knew there was no redemption for him. His fate was sealed, as was humanity's. The darkness was coming, and he, the last guardian of the Church's darkest secret, would be forgotten, just like all those who had tried to resist the power of the Antichrist.